It looks like we're all set. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for our first webinar for our Black History Month series. It is my pleasure today to introduce our panelists, our presenters. So I'm going to go ahead and just tell you a little bit about our panelists for today. We have Tanisha Jones. Tanisha is a prevention social worker at University of Maryland Save Center. She is a recent grad earning her master's degree in social work from Simmons University in Boston, Massachusetts this past May, along with implementing and developing prevention work in some of the international high schools in Prince George's County. She also does clinical work using trauma-informed therapy with survivors of human trafficking. Thank you so much for being with us today, Tanisha. And then we also have Tinotenda Muchenje. Emerged from a beautiful house of stones, Tinotenda Jane Muchenje immigrated from Zimbabwe to the United States, where she was 5 years old, for a life-saving open heart surgery. She is a senior psychology major with a minor in philosophy at the University of Albany of New York. She has adopted and embraced the personal statement, "I welcome all with an open heart," as she is committed to paying it forward through her creative vision to use the visual and social arts for transformation and radical change through discourse and action centered around sexual health, healing, work, and trauma. The continuity of her collegiate career has been centered around the cultivation of self and collective identity. She has promoted prevention education and advocated for change in policy education in a myriad of ways through her work as a volunteer community organizer and student leader, both within her local and campus community. We also have with us today Andolyn Medina. Andolyn Medina is a 25-year-old naval officer currently in her third year of her doctoral degree in clinical psychology at George Washington University. In 2017, Andolyn graduated with her master's in forensic psychology, summa cum laude, and in August 2020, she received her master's psychology in clinical psychology. In addition to being a full-time student, Andolyn also sees patients via teletherapy. She is committed to combating human trafficking while promoting, educating, and bringing awareness to this billion-dollar industry to school, businesses, administrators, law enforcement, and parents. Andolyn is currently a volunteer with Fair Girls, which stands for Free, Aware, Inspired, and Restored, where she conducts presentations, webinars, trainings, and provides resources to victims. She's actively involved with the national organizations such as National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, and National Center for Victims of Crime, as well as the Georgia-based national initiative Demand and End. She's an active member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc., and enjoys reading, traveling, and spending time with her puppy, Knowles, who's named after Beyonce. And we also have Reagan. Reagan Flynn is currently a junior at Pepperdine University, where she is majoring in political sciences with a minor in Hispanic studies. She was born in Los Angeles, California, but grew up in Georgia and has returned to Georgia since last March due to the pandemic and has been completing her coursework remotely. Reagan aspires to be a human rights attorney. Social justice has always been an interest for her since a very young age. She is currently president of March for Our Lives chapter at Pepperdine and an attorney on our mock trial team. Reagan is really excited to be working with Fair Girls as she knows that the work she is doing is not only going to change her lives, but also the lives of others. She really agrees with the message the organization puts out and feels that it is really nice to be able to make a difference. So that's a little bit about our panelists for today. And now, without further ado, I will get us started. And let me transition into sharing my screen now. All right, so before I pass it on to them, I'd like to remind you all that there is a chat box where you can add all your questions. We will be doing Q&A at the end, but if there's any pressing questions, feel free to enter them in the box. So now I will pass it on to them.
Thank you. I guess the first question is, what is Fair Girls? And Fair Girls is an organization that provides intervention and holistic care to survivors of human trafficking who identify as girls or young women. And through prevention education and policy advocacy, Fair Girls also works to eradicate human trafficking and create brighter outcomes for survivors.
And the University of Maryland Support Advocacy, Freedom, and Empowerment Center, also known as Safe Center for Human Trafficking Survivors, provides survivor-centered and trauma-informed services that empower trafficking survivors to heal and reclaim their lives. The Safe Center aims to prevent trafficking and better serve survivors through research and policy advocacy.
So we would love to make today as interactive as possible. So please feel free to sound off in the chats or raise your hands and participate out loud. What is something mischievous you did as a child? Did you paint the walls green, break your family's TV, ruin your mom's favorite dress? How would this mischief be perceived differently depending on your race or ethnicity? I'll share one for myself. My mom is from South Carolina, so there were many days and times that I was there too. And I remember being at grandma's or aunt's houses and being told to cover up just by being a little girl, 4 or 5, in a t-shirt or in a dress, told to cover up because of the men coming over. And so how can we think about that, you know, little Black girls at the age of 4 or 5 already being told how to manage their bodies for the sight of men, for the sight of others, and being over-sexualized from an early age.
So now we'll talk a little bit about what is adultification. According to the Georgetown Center on Law and Inequality, adultification is a form of dehumanization where Black children are robbed of their core of their childhood. Adultification portrays as a false narrative where Black children's transgressions are viewed as malicious and intentional, such as an adult actions would be, rather than a childlike or being immature. What does this look like every day in today's life? Some examples would be she's independent, she's mature, she doesn't require much help. These qualities inappropriately attribute to young Black girls as a result of gender racial bias. The results of this negatively influences the past of these young Black girls.
So in order to perpetuate adultification and keep it going, stereotypes exist, of course, and stereotypes people have historically held about Black women, such as the sapphire, or commonly known as the angry Black women, and the Jezebel, or the hypersexualized Black women. Once again, they play a role in the adultification of Black girls. So just to explain more, the sapphire is, again, known as the angry Black woman. She's evil, she's hateful, and she has no specific physical features other than the fact that her complexion is usually brown or dark brown, and that definitely gets into the conversation about colorism in the Black community as well. Unlike other images that symbolize Black women, sapphire necessitates the presence of the Black male. So the Black male and the Black female are engaged in an ongoing verbal duel, and her purpose is to emasculate him by speaking her mind or using verbal put downs or something. A perfect example that I can think of is any Black woman that is represented in any Tyler Perry film has definitely helped with the perpetuation of this stereotype. The Jezebel is another one, and the Jezebel is the promiscuous female with an insatiable sexual appetite. So in biblical history, Jezebel was the wife of King Ahab of Israel, and her actions came to exemplify lust. And so subsequently, the name Jezebel has become synonymous with women who engage in lewd sexual acts and who take advantage of men through sex. And she's depicted as erotically appealing and openly seductive. And this trope sort of excused slave owners' abuse of their slaves and also gave an explanation for mulatto offspring. And it also brings about the notion that Black women are dishonest and cannot be trusted and not truthful. And this has been exploited many times in our court systems because, once again, with the notion that Black women are not truthful, you can't trust them, it sort of puts a sexual promiscuity on them, even when we don't know their sexual histories. And then there's also another stereotype that I believe Tina Tenda would like to talk about.
Yes. So another stereotype that's often placed onto Black women is the strong, independent Black woman trope. And this can be very dangerous and disparaging in the way that it contributes to the adultification of girls and biases the views that we hold for African American women. When we perpetuate these narratives of strength and independence, we put Black girls in a box of needing to live up to the image. And they're seen as being less vulnerable and needing of help, as they're perceived as being able to carry their own weight when faced with hard times. I think that African American women may feel as though they don't fit into traditional forms of performing femininity when this trope is also placed on them. And they may feel the pressure to carry their own weight with their families and their communities from a very young age without support. And I know in my own experience, when I've built up the courage to be vulnerable, I've often been told about how strong and brave I was. And when I was a little girl, I didn't know strength or what it meant to be brave. And it almost seemed as though my experiences were being dismissed because I could handle it.
So now we're going to play a short clip about adultification biases. I would love to hear you guys sound off in the chat about what comes up for you as you see this clip, even if it's, you know, based on what I said prior about my own experiences or also what the clip presents, because then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion afterwards.
In the United States, adults view Black girls as less innocent and more adult-like than their white peers starting as young as 5 years old. This is known as adultification bias. A groundbreaking study by Georgetown Law Center on poverty and inequality found that adults believe Black girls need less nurturing, less protection, less support, and less comforting. And related studies show that Black girls are punished at a disproportionate rate in schools and the juvenile justice system. These statistics reveal an alarming reality, but do they reflect the experiences of Black girls and women? We conducted focus groups across the country to hear about their lived experiences. They told us that Black girls often face higher standards.
I feel like you cannot make mistakes as a Black girl.
All kids make mistakes, but in similar situations, Black girls are treated differently. A white girl's mistakes might be met with sympathy and understanding. But time after time, Black girls are punished instead because they are held to a more adult standard of behavior.
Everybody says, oh, you should have known better. They're not even acting like we're children.
Those different standards may be linked to harsher treatment for Black girls. We heard stories about adults holding Black girls more accountable for their actions.
During a Foursquare game at school, one of the balls hit a girl in the face. They just threw assault and battery on my record. I had to transfer to a different school, but the other school didn't want to take me because I had assault and battery on my record.
In our focus groups, they overwhelmingly agreed that adultification bias is associated with punitive treatment. Negative stereotypes of Black women are also projected onto Black girls, which can contribute to adultification bias. Focus group participants overwhelmingly confirmed that even when they were young, adults viewed them as less innocent than their white peers.
There was this assumption that you're cussing people out, drinking, and having sex. But since I never thought about that before, they were basically introducing me to those topics right then.
In 6th grade, the school nurse asked my aunt if I was sexually active. And I was like, at the time, like, what? Nobody has sex. Like, I didn't know anyone that had sex. She would never think to ask my white friend that.
Black women and girls also told us that adults stereotype them as too loud, aggressive, or angry, and see Black girls' actions as threatening and disrespectful. Adultification bias erases the distinction between childhood and adulthood, which can have a harmful impact on the lives of Black girls. We need to work together to end adultification bias. These findings in our new study provide key insights into the lived experiences of Black girls and an inspiration to drive change. We are committed to raising awareness and promoting the need for cultural competency training and age-appropriate treatment of Black girls so they can have a childhood in a safe, supportive, and nurturing environment where they can dream, lead, and thrive.
As Black girls, we still need to be protected. It doesn't matter if we're Black or not.
Be part of the change.
So I would also like to add the word intimidating to that list. I think about many times where just me being aware of myself or confident, knowing the facts of a situation, or standing up for myself or in my truth has been seen as an act of aggression. And I see Lachey, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, where she states, you know, asserting herself was viewed as aggressive. I also thank you, Kaylin, for your comment. She stated that as a white woman, this video makes me think of all the times I've been perceived as innocent and let off the hook, specifically with police officers. I think about this also with dress code. I don't know how many of you all at your schools had one, but I remember I went to a predominantly white institution, and I remember girls at my school being able to wear like the tank tops or the camis and short shorts, and their bodies weren't policed in the same way that my friends that went to the predominantly Black schools were, in which they weren't even allowed to sometimes wear shirts and shorts unless it hit the tip of their fingers. There were all these rules and policing surrounding Black bodies. There's also another comment here, several comments, thank you all. In my own experience as a Black woman, I have been perceived to be all of these things in the video. People, mostly white women, assume that I should be the expert on the Black experience when I'm still experiencing it myself. Exactly. I felt I need to be one step over my white counterpart because what I already have strikes against me. And even when I show something different than the stereotypes that are louder in the world, I'm still not seen. I thank you for sharing that, because I think it also highlights this trope that we feel of having to work 10 times harder to get half the recognition. And then at the same time, that still feels like it backfires on us in many ways, and it kind of correlates to the whole aggressive or intimidating. We still have limits placed upon us even as we try to work against it. Amanda shares, I'm also thinking of research showing that people perceive Black individuals, yes, as physically stronger, which plays into perceptions of dangerous. 100%. I can't remember the exact research or literature, but there was research done asking medical students within the 2010-2020 era what they believed about Black bodies as it relates to medicine, and they believed that Black people did not experience pain at the same rate or the same amount as their white counterparts. And this is really scary and really troubling, especially as you think about how it relates to mortality rates with Black pregnancy as well. And I know we have to move on, but I thank you guys for this, and we can definitely add this to the end. One last comment was, we see this in the criminal justice system with all ages, but within juveniles, our Black and brown children are being transferred to the adult system in alarming rates in comparison to their white counterparts. Yes, 100%. One last comment, I was also thinking about how this talks about the United States. And I was thinking about, times that I've traveled abroad, specifically going to Jamaica, and seeing the way that they dance and how that is normalized as a part of their culture. Whereas something that I've noticed in America is that when we think about twerking or anything dancing wise that Black girls do, it's automatically sexualized. It's automatically deemed as them being grown, or wanting to be out there. And so we really do have to challenge both outer stereotypes, but also within community stereotypes that we may not realize that we're projecting.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the consequences of adultification and how it also pertains into the justice system as well. So national data indicates that Black girls are 5.5 times more likely to be suspended from school than white girls. This disparity begins as early as preschool. Data also shows that Black girls account for 20% of girls enrolled in preschool, but 54% of suspensions. Furthermore, kids are more likely to be arrested on days they are suspended. Suspensions are also linked to the increased likelihood of ending in juvenile justice system. Black girls in the system receive more punitive treatment than their white peers. And adults are more likely to identify poor behavior in Black girls as intentional, malicious, adult-like, rather than the result of children's normal behavior or immature or decision-making abilities. And now we'll talk a little bit about adultification and human trafficking. As it pertains to human trafficking, the adultification of Black girls results in profound consequences. For example, Black girls are criminalized by law enforcement rather than being seen as victims, especially when it comes to sex trafficking. Adultification may also deny Black girls of receiving needed services and care. Adultification leads to Black girls being perceived as more mature than they are, therefore being perceived as more likely to willingly choose sex work rather than being trafficked.
So the Women's Media Center helps us put this into context by highlighting the issue of how the history of colonization and slavery has led to the disproportionate effect of women of color being affected by trafficking and therefore criminalized as a result of their victimization. And so as we place that into a historical context, we find that there are high rates in which women of color are sex trafficked and can be traced back to colonization and slavery. One of the examples is Indigenous women being forced to, or being sexually exploited and being forced to assimilate and detach from their religion and their culture. And it's still reflected in the racialized sexual stereotypes that Indigenous women face today. I know the biggest example of that is the sensationalization of Disney's Pocahontas and how that puts forth such a historically inaccurate, wildly historically inaccurate narrative of a relationship between Pocahontas and John Smith being consensual, and therefore erases all the real history that happened there. Similarly, Black women and girls experienced similar treatment during slavery, experiencing sexual exploitation and being hypersexualized. And once again, we still see this happening today because Black women and girls are still being sold at disproportionately high rates. And a historical example of that was definitely Thomas Jefferson and his slaves on Monticello, how Sally Hemings was his main slave. And the reason why so many Black people have the last name Jefferson is because of him. It's because of that routine rape and sexual exploitation. And finally, Latina girls also have a history of being sexually exploited. Some as young as 7 years old were sent to reed camps in California to serve as sex slaves for white farmers for 10 years. And that even continued throughout the 2000s as well. So it's not that far behind as far as history goes.
I just want to emphasize again that this is still happening. We see this being reflected in the numbers today. Between 2008 and 2010, the U.S. Department of Justice investigated 460 cases of commercial sexual exploitation of children. 358 victims involved in those cases were children of color. Similarly, at Fair Girls, about 90% of survivors we serve are women of color.
I just want to address a comment in the chat. Definitely, Nadine said we are perceived as exotic, and I absolutely 100% agree with that. That the fetishization of Black girls as well also plays a role in this bigger part of adultification. But some of you may have heard of the Cyntoia Brown case. For those of you who are not familiar, we'll watch a video about it, but she was tried as an adult, even as a 16-year-old trafficking survivor, because of racial discrimination and identification, leading others to believe that she had malintent. So, and we can talk more, and you can definitely leave some comments in the chat after the video is over.
I just wanted to say thank you first. I know a lot of people get to see you, but I have prayed for a very long time to be able to meet with you.
Centoya Brown is begging for mercy. The 30-year-old is a college graduate, an advocate against sex trafficking, and a convicted murderer.
What I did was horrible. There's nothing to say to justify it. You can't justify it. You can't. You know, I killed Johnny Allen. He's gone. I thought he was reaching for a gun. And then what did you do? I shot him.
Brown admits she did it, but maintains her sentence was too harsh for a teenager. It would take nearly 15 years and attention from A-list celebrities to put her case in the national spotlight and highlight juvenile justice in America. Documentary filmmaker Dan Berman has been following Brown's case since the beginning.
Within a day after Centoya was arrested, the juvenile public defender who was defending Centoya gave me a call and said, "We just arrested somebody who we think you ought to meet."
Officials in Tennessee granted Berman access to the then teenager all the way through her criminal trial.
The idea of the original film was really to explore how one child's situation could be a dot connector for juveniles across America.
Brown was arrested for the murder of 43-year-old Johnny Allen. The teen said she was being prostituted by a pimp named Cutthroat. Cameras were rolling as she described Cutthroat to a psychiatrist.
I remember one time, the first time he did something to me is when he choked me and I passed out. Because he said I thought he was a joke.
What else did he do to you?
He talked real bad to me and jacked me up. He pulled me by my hair and dragged me stuff. He put guns in the pain, told me to strap and stuff like that, getting that at other people.
Did you ever have sex with the guys?
When I put a gun up to me, I did.
Centoya says Cutthroat sent her out to work on that August night in 2004. She ended up at a Sonic where she met Allen. He offered to pay her $150 and took her home, where the two ended up in bed.
At first he was just stroking me, but then it's like he just grabbed me like in between my legs, like he just grabbed it real hard. And he just gave me this look. It was like a very fierce look. And then it just sent these chills up my spine. I'm thinking he's gonna hit me or do something like that. But then he rolls over and reaches, like he's reaching to the side of the bed or something. So I'm thinking, now he's not gonna hit me. He's gonna get a gun.
And what did you do at that time?
I just grabbed the gun and I shot him.
Prosecutors argued Brown's real motive was robbery. She ran away with cash, guns, and Allen's car, which she abandoned. She eventually, anonymously, called 911.
The facts of the case didn't look good. What I couldn't see is that Centoya was at the tail end of 3 generations of violence against women.
In Berman's 2011 documentary, Me Facing Life, Centoya's Story, the filmmaker dives deep into Brown's family background. She was given up for adoption very young. Berman met Brown's biological mother, Gina, who had Centoya when she was just 16.
When I got pregnant, I was drinking. And even after my pregnancy, I still drank on a daily basis. I could drink a bottle that was this big by myself.
Every day?
Every day.
Tests would show Brown was on the fetal alcohol spectrum, a disorder that impacts the brain and behavior. Brown also says she was sexually abused as a child, abuse that continued into her teens, both by relatives and strangers.
That person, while I was asleep, I woke up and he tricked me into it. He was his best friend, and he got me.
In Allen's murder, Brown was eventually charged, tried, and convicted as an adult.
Guilty, first-degree murder.
In Tennessee, that carries a life sentence, 60 years behind bars. Even with good behavior, Brown would have to serve at least 51 years before any chance of parole.
Yeah, it's over with now.
We are the most draconian nature when it comes to how we handle juveniles in this country with sentencing laws.
A pair of recent Supreme Court rulings found mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles were unconstitutional, except in rare circumstances. Since 2014, at least 24 states have enacted new measures, like requiring reviews of life sentences given to teenagers. Tennessee isn't one of them.
A lot of people, not just in Tennessee, but across the country, believe that the juvenile justice system needs to be reformed to recognize that juvenile offenders are different from adult offenders.
Attorney Ed Yarbrough joined Brown's case more than a year ago.
Generally, juveniles' brains are not fully developed before age 18, and obviously the younger they are, the less development you have.
One thing that has changed in Tennessee since Brown's trial, sex trafficking laws.
No longer a child arrested for prostitution is considered as a prostitute. Under Tennessee law, they are now considered victims of sex trafficking, of human trafficking. That's new. It suggests that if Cyntoia were arrested today, she would have been looked at through a different lens.
But as the world outside evolved, Brown grew up behind bars, at first struggling.
I think I've been, for the past 2 years, working on making a personality. I've never had one before.
She went on to earn her GED, then her associate's degree. After years of unsuccessful legal appeals, Brown's case got an unexpected boost from Hollywood. In 2017, Rihanna put Brown's story on Instagram, posting under the hashtag #FreeCyntoiaBrown, saying, "Something is horribly wrong when the system enables these rapists, and the victim is thrown away for life." The hashtag spread like wildfire, attracting other celebrities, like actresses Ashley Judd, Amy Schumer, Elizabeth Banks, Alyssa Milano, and Kim Kardashian.
So definitely looking at the responses in the chat, it's very frustrating how the criminal system continuously victim blames individuals of color as opposed to looking at it from a trauma-informed lens. Absolutely. And this kind of goes hand in hand with this next comment that says, I think it even shows in the video with them calling her a convicted killer, and the types of questions they were asking. Did you have sex with these guys? What else did he do to you? Instead of asking, where were you forced to do these things? Definitely, it definitely shows that even when people are trying to help, they still have that implicit bias, which we'll get into later on, where they ask questions that it's not framed in the right way. So for example, instead of saying he raped her, most people say she was raped. Using it in the passive voice, it still kind of shows some type of bias. Definitely in this video, I saw, I think it was kind of interesting, the difference between adultification and infantilization, and how Cyntoia Brown, as they said, she had fetal alcohol syndrome, so that is a disability. And normally our society puts disabled people, we infantilize them. We treat them like they can't handle themselves, they can't do anything, and so we have to take care of them. And so it's interesting how even though she was disabled, the system automatically, because she was a Black girl, chose to adultify her instead of infantilize her. And yeah, I 100% agree to that. She continued to be victimized when Netflix produced her story without her involvement or consent. Definitely, it definitely plays into how our society exploits Black girls, whether it be sexually or economically, financially. And the never having a personality before, definitely that quote hit me hard. But just the fact that she was so young and obviously not developed, that she had to go through this, definitely exemplifies everything that Black girls have to go through in today's society.
Thank you for that, Reagan. So, this video highlights what we can do on a systemic level, what needs to change, but all too often we forget about the individual level, what we can do for each other. So for those who aren't Black, check your implicit bias. We live in a racist society and we have been socialized in a very racist manner. Growing up, ask yourself, what did you hear about Black people? When you see a Black woman living her life, do you perceive her in some kind of way? When you see a Black girl getting in trouble, do you put more blame on her compared to a white girl? These are things to ask yourself and to check yourself. Listen to Black women and girls. Black women and girls must be at the forefront of this movement. We talked about words like nasty, aggressive, intimidating. When we say those words, clue into when those words are used and to who. Oftentimes, this is how gaslighting happens, in which Black folks can hear the undertone of which these words are being said, and yet it's ignored and overlooked by the others that are in the room. Do not play the savior complex. Make sure you are not coming from the wrong place. We do not need a savior. Allies, accomplices are welcome, but really take time to ask yourself where you are coming from and what is the purpose, what is the intention behind it. Learn and then talk and share that knowledge with your network. Do you know that racist aunt that ruins Thanksgiving dinners? Talk to her. Or your friend that says the N-word a little bit too casually? Talk to them too. Or your friend that says Black women and girls are fast? Talk to them. Black women are often dismissed and gaslit as angry when we hold firm boundaries. If you notice a white woman treating a Black woman's boundaries as an attack while she thanks you for your kind explanation of what's happening, if you want to be helpful to Black women, make it clear that that abusive and racist behavior is unacceptable, rather than reinforcing the expectation that white women should be gently handheld out of their racist behavior. In order to stop racism, we need you to dismantle anti-Blackness within your own communities. And lastly, service providers. Evaluate the way in which you treat, pathologize, and perceive your clients. And does this differ when it comes to race and ethnicities?
When it comes to checking your implicit bias, this is something that you should be doing constantly. Social psychologists have coined a term known as fundamental attribution error, which is our tendency to understand the external or environmental factors that affect our own behaviors. But when it comes to other people, we tend to overemphasize internal behaviors or personality traits as the sole cause of why you see the behavior that they do. And as mentioned before, racism is at the very root of this country's foundation. So when it comes to Black women, oftentimes we may see them and think, oh, they're doing this because that's just how they are, or it's something that's in their nature. When really there's a lot of environmental factors, a lot of systemic factors that are influencing a lot of the things that we see. And racism is an international issue as well. Chances are you have had a racist family member, and you probably have a racist family member now. So it's really important to make sure that you're continuously checking your implicit biases. And I want you to think, in what ways has their ideologies shaped you? We'll now show a short video on how to go about checking your unconscious biases.
Welcome, Stanford Professor of Psychology and MacArthur Genius Grant awardee, Dr. Jennifer Eberhardt.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to tell you a story. I'm waiting for Iris to appear. This is Iris, okay? Check Iris out. She's 28 years old, and she lives in Los Angeles. She has a pet fish named Columbo, and she's working on her master's degree. She also has a brown belt in Taekwondo. Now, I want you to answer this to yourself silently. Which one is Iris? How many of you said this one? Raise your hand if you said that. Okay, what about this one? Okay, well, the second one is right. Did any of you have trouble finding Iris? It's okay to be honest. You had trouble? Okay, all right. I have another story for you. This is Joy. And Joy is 31 years old and she lives in Boston. She works as an administrator. She has a dog named Lily, and she loves horror movies. Her best friend is her sister, Kate. Now, let's do this again. Which one is Joy? Okay, if you thought this one, you've got the right Joy. All right. And here's the thing, if you got Joy right, there's a better chance that you're Asian. And if it was easy for you to find Iris, there's a good chance that you're white. So what we just demonstrated here is a phenomenon that exists across countries, across cultures, across ethnic groups, and it's called the other race effect. The reality is that typically we all have trouble distinguishing faces of people from races other than our own. And it makes sense, right, if you think about it? Most of us simply have less experience with faces from other races. We see them less frequently at family dinners, at our primary schools, in our hometowns, and so forth. But this isn't just about our environment. The other race effect is actually wired into our brains. The act of perceiving faces is critical to our ability to function as humans. So this highlighted area you see here is the brain's fusiform face area, or FFA, one of multiple places in the bottom back of the brain